Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers. On board here at Campaign for America with John McCann. Folks, we've got a lot to talk about tonight, and there's been a very serious tragedy that occurred yesterday that we're going to talk about in Pennsylvania. Those of you who heard what happened, I'm sure you were as appalled and outraged as I was, and we'll be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about why a vote for a Democrat. We've warned the people all across this country in our speaking engagements on TV networks and here on Campaign for America. A vote for a Democrat may very well be a vote to send your children to war. And we'll be talking about that. Also, folks, I've got to tell you, we've got to get people out to vote. I'm hearing over and over again from some Republican leaders as well as some other people in the Republican Party telling you not to go out and vote. Well, we're going to let you know where those messages are really coming from and why it is absolutely necessary for you to go out and vote. And also, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, has been weaponized to go after who? Not to go after terrorists, not to go after corrupt politicians, but to go after parents. And we'll be talking about that. But first, folks, before we move on with some of these very important issues, we're thinking of holding a Christmas party, folks, here in Nutley, New Jersey, maybe the first week of December, to meet many of you who have viewed us. So stand by for information about that. We'll certainly send that to you within the next couple of weeks. Also, our newsletter, our intelligence report will be going out within the next 2 or 3 days. If you do not receive a copy of that report, by all means, email us. In fact, go to our website. You see it on the banner, the red banner on the bottom there. Go to our website and by all means, fill out the contact information and we'll get you that information that you need to know. All right, John, let's first talk about the outrage. I mean, John, 38 years, I'm a cop. Never heard of anything so outrageous. So here's where it goes, and we'll talk to John and inform all of you what occurred last night, yesterday in Pennsylvania. So you have a woman boards a train, a subway train in Pennsylvania, and she goes into a full car, a car filled with people. I mean, really filled. Sits down in her seat. So allegedly, an individual comes over to her and starts grabbing her and groping her and harassing her. Well, over a 40-minute period, the groping, the touching her inappropriately, folks, ended up being a vicious rape. She was being raped on that railroad car, and instead of a car load of people, John, stopping the rapist, they filmed it. Every single one of them. Not one person came to her aid, begging and screaming for help, and not one person came to her aid. Now, John, I understand there is information now that the suspect has a long criminal history. He's been released from jail several times, probably on the bail reform, and they're checking into his legal status. Is he an illegal immigrant? Well, they're going to check into that because I kept on hearing reports that he should have been deported a long time ago. John, do you have any updates on this?
I don't, as it relates to the facts. You know what I know, Steve. But I will make a commentary, if you don't mind, with regard to the sad state of affairs for citizenship in America. Part of the goal of the American left has been to silence the majority voices. And part of that silence is some sort of form of self-censorship, where people are afraid to speak out, or in this case, afraid to take any action and do anything. If that was a family member of mine or yours, I would hope people would do something. But we've now come to realize why the Second Amendment is so important. And if a city like Philadelphia, which was once one of the crown jewel cities of America, if the citizenship doesn't mean enough for people to intervene while someone's engaging in an act where they themselves would be probably physically vulnerable. Okay. I mean, the rapist is in a vulnerable position at some point, and how you do not take him out. And yet the opposite has occurred here. They're filming it and posting it. This speaks to the moral fiber of what the American left has been able to achieve on self-censoring good citizens of our country, and the fear of getting involved and the aftermath and what all that involves. And particularly, as you mentioned, particularly bail reform, I don't know what the circumstances are surrounding his prior releases, but in this particular case, you could see somebody sitting there and evaluating, well, wait a minute, even if I do something, this kid could be on the street again and then coming at my house the next day. I'm not saying that the fear isn't rational, that the people may have felt, but that fear has to be, Stephen, you're in the military. Everyone has fear, but you have to act. Yeah,
But John,
yes.
The problem is the people fear the government. The government does not fear the people, and it's got to be the other way around. Now, you mentioned the Second Amendment. Now, I talked about this and tweeted something out earlier that this is another reason, as you say, why we need the Second Amendment. Well, all of a sudden, folks, liberals, Democrats, socialists, progressives jumped all over that saying, well, you know what, Lieutenant, here you go. You're politicizing a criminal act. Folks, I'm not politicizing anything. The fact of the matter is, as John just said, we don't have cops who can protect us anymore in a lot of these Democrat cities. I firmly believe that you, as an individual, should have the right to carry a weapon to protect yourself. And John, I'll tell you, and I'll say it here on the air, if I was on that train and this guy was raping that woman and he wouldn't get off, I would have shot him. It's as simple as that. I would have shot him. And that's the mindset that people need to take right now. I'm not suggesting we go out and use deadly force on all sorts of incidents, because when you are a gun owner and you own that gun legally and you're carrying it legally, you go through a lot of training like I did as a police officer. Deadly force is your last resort. But John, here's the problem with this, and you just touched on it. It's a societal problem. Is it so bad that people are standing around watching a woman get beaten and raped, begging for her life? Now, folks, I've got daughters. I know many of you have daughters. And I mean, I can't imagine, John, if that was our kid on that train. So the psyche of the American people, and I hope this is wrong, seems to be, well, look you know what? If we get involved, we're going to jail, not the bad guy. Thus, they don't get involved.
Well, that's what I was saying. It's not like their fear isn't justifying it. To finish the thought, the fear of the perpetrator, of course, but also, as you point out, I mean, the fear of the government. We saw the two personal injury lawyers, husband and wife, in St. Louis, Missouri. A mob broke through their gate, came onto their property, and physically threatened to burn their homes down while trespassing, not just through the common areas of their property, but on the actual property they own. And they got prosecuted by the Soros district attorney. They got prosecuted and had to cut a deal. Now they that particular couple made a plea arrangement, but what they went through for a year is impossible. You said they fear the government. Everyone saw that across the country. And so you have to ask, what's the cumulative effect? Well, you're seeing, in my opinion, it's just an opinion, that what happened in Philadelphia is an extension of that fear and intimidation tactic. They wanted to hold those two attorneys up, the husband and wife, 60 some odd years old, who brandished a weapon. Okay, they wanted to make an example of them, and for all we know, that had some sort of sociological interplay of what happened in Philadelphia. But just the good news for that couple is the governor pardoned them. Okay, and rightfully so. That prosecutor's out of line. We know the prosecutor in Philadelphia is another Soros-funded district attorney. This is becoming a big problem. The American left is infiltrating the American bureaucracies and now has firm grip on many of these liberal cities, Chicago, Boston, New York. We saw what Cy Vance was doing in New York with the cops over the last few years, going after President Donald Trump for tax stuff from 40 years ago and trying to bring the Trump down. I mean, they're weaponizing the law, and they're trying, and because totalitarians can't persuade you to turn over your power to them, so they do it by force. And that's where we're heading, and that's where I think this country, the sad truth of the matter for the victim yesterday is she's not just a victim of that scumbag. She's a victim of the American left purposely trying to intimidate good American citizens.
Now let's pick up on that, folks. I talked about this issue regarding crime and how it's increasing around the country. And the host of this network broadcast asked me, well, when do you think, or how do you think it stops? Now, I want you to hear me clear, folks, so that nobody misinterprets what I'm saying. First of all, I wish ill on no one. I don't want to see anybody, left, right, progressive, in between. I don't want to see any other human being hurt by any criminal acts. However, the question was, how's this going to change? Because of the aggressiveness of socialists and communists and individuals who care little about potential crime victims, crime is beginning to spread. Poor people in minority neighborhoods, like we see in Chicago, the blood of these poor people are being shed every weekend. We know that. Nothing's been done by the Democrats. New York City, more shootings, more people tossed into subway tracks. Nothing is being done by the Democrats. So here's my point, folks. You know when it stops? You want to know when things change? When these criminals go into the neighborhoods of those who are yelling defund the police, go into the neighborhoods who are placing upon you and me the draconian measures that are brought to us by sympathizers of Lenin, Marx, and Stalin. You see, once, John, it hits their house, their neighborhood, and I don't want to see this happen to anybody, then you'll see them crying for bloody murder for the police. Either they're going to cry for the police or they're going to cower in the corner of their house until the criminals burn their houses down. Because, John, they need to know, they meaning the people who support these laws that are hurting us, that are criminalizing the good people and making the bad people the victims, they need to know that when Mr. Criminal or Mrs. Criminal comes to their house, they're going to not knock on the door and say, gee, are you a Democrat or a Republican? They're going to kick the door in, like I've seen so many times in my police work. They're going to find out where your wife or your husband is or your daughter is. They're going to beat them half to death. They may even tie them up and torture them in front of you. Yeah, folks, this is what goes on. This is reality. Hasn't happened in the neighborhoods where these people who so-called leaders supposed to be protecting us, hasn't happened to them yet. But it's going to happen, folks, and then you'll see things change, hopefully. I hope and pray it doesn't happen. I hope and pray that we, the people of this country, could take power and make sure that the government is kneeling to us, not us kneeling to the government. So, John, what do you think of that theory or that suggestion that I just had, that when it hits their home, maybe things will change?
I think you're right, but I think that what you're dealing with is a group that is very practiced and strategic in what they do. So they know what areas to go in. They know what they've already been in here in New Jersey, Steve. Just a year ago, they were surveilling some of the suburbs in New Jersey. BLM was coming into some of the suburbs through high school students, through a teacher. Okay. Oh, we're just going to support Black Lives Matter. Well, Black Lives Matter wants to blow up the nuclear family. That's what they said. It was on their website until they took it down. Okay. It's not me saying it. It's what they said. Okay. So, they're very strategic. They preach strategy. It's part of the Saul Alinsky 13 principles of strategic operation. They are very self-aware on where they can go, where they can't go. Now, going back to the communities in New Jersey, I mean, they came into Oakland, New Jersey, and I called our mayor, said, how can you let this happen? Don't you understand they are running a surveillance operation here? This is a test because they'll be back if they see weakness. I mean, and obviously she doesn't understand what I'm talking about because all she cares about is how many Girl Scout parties she can go to get more votes. Okay. And she happens to be a Democrat who used to be a Republican, and she's a politician and not a good one at that. But the fact of the matter is, this is a strategic war on our country to overthrow it, in my opinion. Okay. We see people across the country having to take these courses from all of these people spewing hate. They define racism as it has to. Black people cannot be racist. Only white people. It's in their definition through these courses they take. The American left is strategic. I agree with your premise, but they're not going to go to those areas. Through their strategy, they're going to avoid those areas. They're going to try to keep the people that are with them. They're not going to. But here's the interesting thing. You notice Bill Maher, for example, starting to realize he's losing his audience, and he's starting to make comments flat out that are ruffling the left. Bill is a very wealthy man, very successful comedian, but but he is also one of the commentators on public policy and is a leader of public opinion. He has a lot of people attend his show. He has great ratings. And I don't look to these types of people for our values, but I do look at them to see what the culture is. And I noticed that Maher himself is starting to get the joke. He's starting to get the joke. And I just feel for this woman. I don't know her, but she's a victim twice over.
Well, you know what, John, you're right. She's a victim from this horrendous criminal act, and also from the government, who's supposed to protect us and her, and failed to protect her. All right, John, a couple other things surfaced over the past 48 hours. The USS Richard Bohami, that is a U.S. warship, folks, a Navy ship that was caught on fire, apparently was arson a few weeks ago. Well, there was a Navy investigation that revealed that the lack of training, among other things, resulted in the fire spreading. Think about that, John, the lack of training. Now, folks, it goes back to what we said about what's happening to the military. And John just mentioned it, that this woke ideology is permeating even our military. So again, I was on the air and I suggested that perhaps General Milley and the Joint Chiefs of Staff should be more concerned about training our troops to be warfighters, training our troops to fight fires aboard ships. Folks, I've been on many U.S. warships, well-trained. Everyone participates in fighting fires and helping out in an emergency. I can't for the life of me figure out how this fire spread, and that there was a lack of training and firefighting aboard a U.S. warship. Except, John, these guys and these gals in the military, in the Navy, these sailors, were dragged into classrooms to learn about how to be politically correct to our enemies. The woke establishment, folks, they're sitting in classrooms. And I heard this from a former Soviet a warrior, if you will, Soviet military officer. While the American military troops are sitting in classrooms, you could be sure that Vladimir Putin has his special forces training day in and day out on how to defeat what has now become, and these are his words, a very, very weak military. John?
General Milley is a disgrace to America. Period. He should resign. He won't. He should be held accountable for what he did in Afghanistan. He quickly threw the President of the United States, his boss, the person who gave him the job, under the bus, saying, I told him we should leave 2,500 troops. This guy has one agenda, and that is to follow the American left's Marxist agenda, and they're infiltrating. And that's what the vaccine mandates in the military is about. It's about getting people to resign and leave and take the commission so they can leave. Instead of having strong leaders, they can have many of the weak followers left in the military. And I ask you, is that a strong military that will stand up to China or to Russia or any Iran, okay, or any other of our enemies? No. This is a deliberate attempt by the American left, dating back to the early 1960s, and even going back on 100 years prior to that, just around the Civil War, to destroy the American institutions, to destroy the country. You know, the classrooms that they're sitting in, Steve, you know, people are sitting there, and they're not classrooms, by the way. These are indoctrinations, okay? Because they don't allow for dissent in these classrooms. They one of the things they do at the outset of the class is they say, let's define racism. And they quickly establish that only whites could be racist. So you have a bunch of white soldiers sitting there listening to people that have no idea what they do for a living in terms of being in the military, getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to indoctrinate these white soldiers and black soldiers that say, oh, by the way, you are a racist and there's no getting around it. That's part of the defined terms. How can you sit there and not speak up and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? You can't define me. You don't know me as an individual. Okay. You know what they say? I've actually heard this in other education settings. I've heard some of this where they say things to the effect of, well, there's too much individualism. There's too much. This is coming from the people teaching these courses.
John, too much individual freedom.
That's what they say. They admit it. They admit that they're Saul Alinsky followers in these courses. And And they do. They openly admit it. And for the people that don't know, ever heard of Saul Alinsky, which is most people, okay, unless you're well read and in the know in this stuff and understood the cultural wars that Newt Gingrich talked about in the '90s, people just sit there and listen. And so you're sitting in a class and you're or you're sitting in an environment where they use conformity, peer pressure. Okay, so you have white people going, "Oh, I have received special treatment, preferential treatment, my special period, my special advantage," and Steve, it is so the stuff is so anti-intellectual. It's a laugh. They can't when they're challenged, they can't deal with it, and they just shut you down.
Well, and that's what they do, John, and
that's what they're doing to our soldiers, Steve. That's what they're doing to our soldiers.
Yeah, and our elementary school, high school, and colleges. That's how wide it's spreading, folks. Now, I sent out a tweet, a message on Facebook, and even did a little commercial today asking people to tune in because something is going on, folks, with regard to our foreign policy. A lot of you don't know what we're about to tell you. I'm sure most of you don't know what we're about to tell you. It's something that you want to think about as you hear what I'm about to tell you. We have here on Campaign for America, as I've said, around the country, on social media as well as on major media broadcasts, told everybody we could that Joe Biden and the Democrat Socialist Party is going to drag us into a very bad war. Very bad, folks. We're not talking about a small skirmish somewhere. We're talking about an all-out, very bad, bloody war. Now, what do I base that on? Think about this, folks. I kind of, you look at history, and as a military career officer, we had to do a lot of studying of military leaders, of foreign governments, and a lot of history. And there's always things going on, John, as you know, leading up to a possible military action. So here's what goes on, folks. Joe Biden decides to pull out of Afghanistan. We all know that, right? And it was a disaster. Well, that sent a very clear message to both friend and foe of America that the United States government is no longer the most powerful nation on earth. The United States government has a weak military. This is the message that they got, friend and foe. Well, let's talk about friend at the moment. Let's talk about Taiwan. Joe Biden has made it clear to the Chinese government that we will defend Taiwan. That's what he's done. He thinks he made it clear to President Xi that the United States will come to the defense of Taiwan. So President Xi's answer was over 100 fighter jets and bombers, John, flying pretty close to Taiwanese airspace.
Oh, in Taiwan. In
Taiwan airspace. Okay. And the ground forces, the Chinese Communist Party ground forces, now doing drills on a land invasion, folks, in China. Now that has been going on for the past few weeks. So there's the answer, folks, from China. So we know that, all right? But here's what a lot of us don't know. A lot of us don't know that the Biden administration sent a diplomat to where? To the country of Georgia, a former Soviet satellite. Went to the country of Georgia to do what? To poke Vladimir Putin in the eye again. I've said this over and over and over again. You're only going to get away with poking the bear so much before he responds. So here's what happens. So this American Joe Biden diplomat goes to Georgia, and they sign an agreement that assures Georgia, listen to this, folks, that we will come to their defense in the event anyone threatens their national security. There's thousands and thousands of Russian troops on that border or close to it. And could you imagine, John, just think about this. Could you imagine being Vladimir Putin sitting in the Kremlin, not knowing that Joe Biden was going to do this, and sends a diplomat to a potential enemy, because Georgia and Russia don't get along, folks, and just making a commitment to them. Don't worry about it, Mr. Prime Minister of Georgia. The blood of American kids will be shed on your behalf if Russia invades. That's what this was all about. So that's one of the things that perhaps you didn't know. Another thing, again, what does Joe Biden decide to do, John? after the Georgia trip, well, there's either talk of, or maybe it happened, going to Ukraine, folks. Now, why are you going to Ukraine? You're going to Ukraine to let Russia know that you're not going to invade Ukraine. So we're going to shore up our alliance with Ukraine. And we're sending another message, a poke in the eye to Vladimir Putin, that if you dare to do anything with regard to the national security of Ukraine, American blood will be shed on Ukrainian soil in defense of Ukraine. So, John, we've got Taiwan, we've got Ukraine, we've got Georgia. The Lord knows how many other countries Joe Biden's going to commit our blood to. But I dare say this, folks, at this point in time, and believe me, I draw these conclusions based on my experience and what I know of regarding the condition of our U.S. military. There is no way, John, I never believed I would be saying this. There is no way that the United States can win a war against Russia. Not gonna happen, folks. As we see our young men and women being dragged into classrooms to learn about all of this nonsense, the Russian Federation, remember, folks, former Soviet crack troops. Remember who's ahead of that government. KGB director named Vladimir Putin. John, he is the former KGB director. He's smart, he's sharp, and he's got his eyes on the ball, while our president has closed his eyes. So, folks, and John, I'll toss this to you. A vote for a Democrat, any Democrat on any level of government, especially the Congress, I believe will eventually be a vote to send our children to a war we cannot win.
Well, you're bringing up interesting points as it relates to how things ramp up, and you have to read the tea leaves. And one of the things we discussed on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, Steve, was the fact that the United States Congress has now passed a bill authorizing the registration for women up to the age of 25 to register for the Selective Service System. Up till this point, it's been all male registration requirement. And we talked about how that. Well, what does that mean? It means we don't have enough people to draft from in the pool of men, and so we've expanded it to include women. And the question is, like, why would we do that out of the blue? Just let's do this now too. There's a reason why government acts. There's a purpose when a government, whether it's your local town, when it passes an ordinance for no parking overnight, or to whether or not we're going to include women in the Selective Service System. There's a reason why these things happen. They just not pulled out of the sky. So if you couple that, Steve, with what's going on, it's very scary. And Donald Trump did say Joe Biden will get us into a war. And frankly, his history as a foreign policy expert is his record stands on its own. To quote the former CIA director, who was a director for both Obama and for Bush, stated that Joe Biden's been wrong on every major foreign policy issue facing America since he's been in the Senate. So he just continues to be wrong. There's no surprise here. The surprise here, of course, is that this is, as mentioned in one of the comments here, I think it was Lisa who said, so we're going to war with Russia to distract the Taiwan issue. I find this very interesting. The last time I checked, Taiwanese, the Chinese, they consider themselves Chinese, and they are people of color, and the Ukraine is not, and neither is Georgia. I find that very interesting. Is this a racist foreign policy that we're dealing with here by Joe Biden? I don't know if that has any play in that, but it's a point I'd like to raise. And interesting about the Taiwan issue. This has been going on since really Bill Clinton allowed L'Oreal Corporation to sell their GPS technology to the Chinese government back in the 1990s. We could talk about that in a future podcast. Okay, it was Bill Clinton who, in the middle of the night, authorized the sale of L'Oreal Corporation. Google this, ladies and gentlemen. Don't take my word for it. It's all out there to be read. And Bill Clinton allowed China to get our GPS technology. They didn't have it.
Well, John, yeah, there's such a history going way back. You're absolutely right. But it's leading up to this point
Mhm.
where all of this is going to be paid for by your kids, folks, and maybe my grandchildren if we don't step up and do something. Now, Arnold Sherman, he's our Florida director, and he just posted something that I failed to mention, and I'm glad he put it up there. Campaign for America, Florida State Director Arnie Sherman says, not to mention that North Korea is also flexing its muscles. Yes, folks, North Korea is. They're firing missiles not too far away from Japan and other countries in that area, South Korea, etc. So, John, here's the bottom line, and it leads me to this part of our discussion. Folks, we've committed ourselves to be on for about 30 to 40 minutes. We want to, keep these things concise so that more and more people. I found that out, John, a little bit more concise, and more people are watching. So that's not bad. And we're doing good. We're doing good. So it leads me to this, John, and this is important. I know it's important. We still have Republicans across this country, and I hear it in New Jersey, who are telling people, Republicans in particular, not to vote, to sit home and not to vote. Why? Because of the election integrity issue. Folks, I've got to tell you something. Anyone who tells you not to vote is committing a tremendous disservice to this country. They're committing a disservice to people like me who wore a military uniform, like my son, who was a Marine and fought in Iraq against the toughest military on earth at that time, against every person in uniform from 1776 to this time that we're living in. So anyone who tells you not to go vote, I am just asking you not to listen to them. And John, another point on this, that by Republicans in particularly not voting, they are surrendering. They are surrendering this flag behind me, and they're going to replace it with a white flag, and they're going to allow Democrat, socialists, and communist folks to raise a flag that is red and has a hammer and sickle on it, because that's where we're headed if we don't stand up and stop it. Now, about the election integrity, we do what we can. There are a lot of things going on. That's in the past. We got to look at the future. The Chinese Communist Party, now please listen to me, folks. The Chinese Communist Party has a lot to do with trying to discourage American patriots to go vote. A lot to do with it. Tons of propaganda, misinformation. Every day, John, from friends of mine, I'm getting garbage. I'm getting absolute garbage. They actually believe some of the garbage that is being put out there. And it spreads around, and before you know it, you got millions of us. Millions of us are believing the garbage, not even thinking about checking things out and deciding, well, I'm not going to go vote, Lieutenant, because of this and that. Well, folks, if you're not going to go vote, then you don't complain about anything. I believe that here in New Jersey, as well as across the country, we have a very, very good chance, we the people, patriots, Republicans, conservatives, of taking control of our local and state governments. And John, you've been involved. You ran for Congress. Now I'm going to ask you your assessment. 2022, if we come together as Americans, I'm talking about Republican conservatives, independents, even moderates, all right? This idea of calling people names, you and I have talked about it, that's got to come to an end, folks. This is all about America now. So what we've got to do is come together, and John, we have an opportunity to truly take control of the United States House of Representatives and the Senate, and then 24th, the White House. John?
No, next year is critical. That's part of why the Democrats are delaying this bill, this what I call a $2 trillion package, because that's all it really is. It's always been there, Steve. This 3.1 is, it's like any other negotiation. When you go to buy an automobile or a house, there's an asking price and then there's the real price. And that's what's going on here. But we could talk about that in a future podcast. It may be too late. But we have a great opportunity. And if you want to impeach Joe Biden, you're going to need a Republican Congress. I will caution, and it doesn't mean that we vote for the best Republicans either all the time, as you know. But it's our only shot because
John, it's a seat at the table. It's a seat at the table.
It's a seat at the table, and we got in America, unlike other democratic countries. Okay, we're not a parliamentary system. We are a representative republic. Okay, we have essentially two political parties. People have tried starting third parties. Ross Perot, all that. It's very difficult to do because partisanship, and people vote for many different reasons. My father was a Democrat, so I had to vote for the Democrat. My mother was a Republican. So all that kind of stuff is at play when it comes to voting. But the key here is that you point out is you got to vote. And if we do vote, okay, there's a great chance of taking back Congress, and then we can fight amongst ourselves on what's the best path forward. But if you want to save America, vote. Don't listen to people telling you not to vote, whoever that may be. It could be the former president of the United States. It could be your next door neighbor. That's part of what the socialists and the rules of radical teaches. Never keep the pressure on, and that is they want people to not trust the system. They want people to say my vote doesn't count. You're playing into their hands. And perhaps Steve, on the next podcast, we can get deep into the rules for radicals. Solinsky, just read what they wrote.
Yeah, John, you and I discussed that earlier, and that'll be fascinating, folks. So next week, you're going to want to tune in and hear that. Now, Jennifer just put something here that reminds me of something.
Yes.
Jennifer put down, freedom isn't free, but unfortunately, it sure is for sale these days. Very, very profound, Jennifer. And it leads me to this. I forgot about one piece of what I was going to say tonight, and Jennifer reminded me. Unfortunately, it sure is for sale. Folks, something else I can't wrap my arms around. How is it that any union in this country, union leaders, in particular, because I was a union president, a police PBA union president locally, how is it that any law enforcement union could endorse any Democrat? Here in New Jersey, we got the State Troopers Fraternal Association, their union endorsed Phil Murphy. Last night, we've got the Probation Officers Association apparently endorsed Phil Murphy. And then the Port Authority Police Union reps endorsed Phil Murphy. Now, why do I bring this up? Jennifer is so right when she uses the term, unfortunately, it sure is for sale. John, think about this. Think about these three unions endorsing the very people that presented to them, the cops on the street, bail reform, that is now advocating civilian review boards to take their jobs, basically, if they get into trouble, that is causing an absolute catastrophic crime rate increase across the country as a result of wanting to defund them. So the very people, the union leaders, who are not the street cops, I've talked to them, and they're just as sickened over this as we are endorsing the very people that are going to destroy their careers. John, could you wrap your arms around this? Because I can't.
I can't, Steve. My experience in New Jersey politics is very simple. It's what she just typed. It's for sale. So they will sacrifice pay increases.
Crumbs, John. They're crumbs.
Clearly, it's crumbs.
The politicians eat their bread, right, folks? As an analogy, and they sweep the crumbs off the table, and these union leaders are on their hands and knees crawling, John, for the crumb.
Well, you could say that. I mean, their view is they've concluded that there's no way for the Republican to win, and I'm not saying that's an unrealistic conclusion. The math certainly favors Phil Murphy largely, but you never know. Okay, Jack Ciattarelli's fighting hard. This is a vote this election is going to depend upon turnout. But with 1 million people, advantage Democrats, registered voters, that's a hard thing for Mr. Ciattarelli to overcome. But he's a good man. Okay, Mr. Ciattarelli's a good man, and he would be a far better governor than what we have. But Steve, for sale, yes, I get what the union leadership is doing, but I can tell you, I know for a fact that the on the ground guys are out of touch with their leadership. The leadership's out of touch rather with their members. The members aren't going that way. They can write on a piece of paper whatever they want. They can support on a piece of paper whatever is going to happen. The rank and file is not with this governor. They're not. At least in North Jersey. I haven't talked to many South Jersey guys, but in North Jersey, I've spoken to the biggest unions up here. The membership people are not. Now, that's not to say that's not a bad political strategy. If you're a union guy, let the rank and file vote for who they want to, while we publicly endorse who we think is going to win. So it's really basic. They're going to get paid off. But here's the problem, Steve. When you're one of those officers next year or 2 years from now that are going before a civilian review board, and your pension is taken away from you on a rumor or innuendo, on an alleged fact that is so far removed from the truth, and you are forced to resign, and your family has to move from New Jersey because you certainly can't afford to live here and retire here. Everyone who retires here goes south. We know that. Especially it's an interesting thing, Steve. I don't know if you know, but in New Jersey, almost 90% of the public employees who retire with their great pensions here, they leave the state.
Yes, they do.
They
well,
do.
you know what?
They're breaking up families with these policies.
For those fellow officers who I've worked with many years, stand up and clean your swamp, meaning your union leadership out. They are out to destroy you. In fact, some of them already have. Just keep that in mind as we move forward. So, folks, that's it. So, John, I think we did good. It's about 7:10. We're in that half hour, 40-minute range. A couple of things, folks. A reminder, we're thinking of having a Christmas get-together, a Christmas party with some of our viewers and followers here in Nutley, New Jersey, sometime in December. So if you'd like to come to this party, once we set it up, just be on the lookout. We're going to be sending invitations out, and those who respond certainly will make sure you have reservations. And we're not talking, folks, about a party that's going to cost you, John, the $1,000. Remember, I still get them, John. $5,000 for this gold-plated dinner, $10,000 for this. You know, folks, we're going to make it very reasonable. I'm thinking maybe, John, even $10, $15 that people could pay for their own food if we do that. But we're going to have a get together, folks, and we think we'll have a lot of fun. John, myself, our whole team will be there, and maybe we'll do a little bit of a broadcast live from that party that we want to set up. So that's it, John. Any few words before we head out?
Pizza and soda.
Pizza and soda. Well, I got to tell you, folks, pizza, the best is from Brooklyn, New York. My hometown, Brooklyn, John, Bay Ridge, the best pizza on earth. I just lost a lot of friends in New Jersey for saying that.
Well, I'm going to go. I'll bail you out of that one. The best pizza is Pizza Regina in the north end of Boston. Although I will say in New Jersey, La Sorrentina in North Bergen is spectacular homemade pizza. La Sorrentina in North Bergen.
Well, that's it, folks.
That's a great pizza place too. But Pizza Regina, for me, in the heart of the north end of Boston, I got to go with that.
And by the way, folks, speaking of New York City, I urge all of you in the city of New York to go out and vote for Bill Pepitone as your next mayor of New York City. We had him here in Nutley Friday night. We went out to dinner. We did a few commercials. Bill Pepitone. Remember that name, Bill Pepitone. He is running on the conservative ticket in the city of New York. He's running against a Republican and a Democrat who's embracing, at least in my view, a socialist agenda. You're right, John. They're all over the place, these socialists. But we got a good guy there in New York. Bill Pepitone.
Steve, they're in
All right, folks, that's it. On behalf of John and myself, thank you for joining us. Please share these broadcasts. By the way, we are now on Rumble, so we're expanding our base. And John, maybe pretty soon we're going to be setting up a real good podcast that will go far and wide across the country. That's it, folks. Have a great evening. God bless you. And look, I always try to sign off with something good, because there's always something good in all of the darkness and troubles that we see. What's good is that although things change politically, things change in our lives, the one thing that doesn't change, and the one person who doesn't change, is Christ. The one person who doesn't change is God Almighty. So we can depend on him through thick and through thin, that he has since 1776 and to this day kept the shadow of his wings over this nation. And that means he's going to be keeping the shadow of his wings over you. So no matter what you're going through, there is power in prayer. Prayer to God works. Don't let anyone ever tell you it doesn't. Thank you, folks. God bless you. God bless America. And remember what the chief end of man is: to love and glorify God forever. Good night, John. Thank you.
Good night, Stephen.